All right, let's dive right into this explainer where we are going to unpack the ultimate ancient detective story. We're exploring a truly fascinating chapter of human history known as the Harappan civilization. I want you to imagine a sprawling, highly sophisticated society that thrived thousands of years ago, yet left behind absolutely no deciphered historical texts or grand, boastful monuments. Instead, they left us the silent echoes of their everyday lives, their bricks, their beads, and their bones.
To solve this case, our investigation log is going to guide us through a few key areas: the Harappan mystery, mapping the ancient world, seeds, bones, and survival, cities of stolen brick, tracking social differences, and finally, piecing together the past.
First up on the log, the Harappan mystery and their entirely undeciphered history.
So we got to start with the absolute biggest, most glaring knowledge gap in all of ancient history. Usually, when we're studying great ancient civilizations, we have their writings to tell us their names, their rulers, and their myths. But the Harappans? Totally different story. They left behind these incredible seals, carefully carved from a soft stone called steatite. They feature beautifully detailed animal motifs, like a unicorn or a bull, sitting right next to a line of their script. But here is the massive catch. Those symbols, they remain entirely undeciphered. Nobody can read them. Because their written language is still a total mystery, archaeologists literally have to act as real-life detectives. They can't just read a scroll about what the Harappans did. They have to rely entirely on physical clues, the pots, the ornaments, the tools, and the seals, to reconstruct their lives. Material evidence rather than written records is our one and only key to their past. Moving on to part 2, mapping the ancient world across modern-day India and Pakistan. Before we start examining those physical clues, let's establish the scene of the crime, right? Where and when did these people actually live? Well, the whole civilization spans an incredibly long time, roughly 6000 BCE to 1300 BCE. But the really juicy part, the era of great urban cities, is what we call the mature Harappan phase. This was their golden age, a period of remarkable urban development, kicking off around 2600 BCE and lasting until things gradually started to decline around 1900 BCE. And the sheer staggering scale of their world is just mind-blowing. Spanning across modern-day India and Pakistan, archaeologists have actually discovered over 2,000 settlements. Most of them are clustered right between the Indus and Saraswati river basins, and they range from tiny little farming villages all the way up to massive, bustling urban centers like Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, and Dholavira. All right, section 3, seeds, bones, and survival. Let's look at their subsistence strategies. To really understand who these people were, we first got to figure out what fueled these massive, sprawling cities. The answer? Incredible resourcefulness. By zooming in on microscopic evidence, we're talking charred grains and seeds pulled straight from the dirt, specialists known as archaeobotanists have proven that the Harappans ate a really rich, diverse diet. They cultivated a huge variety of plants, ate different kinds of meat, and relied heavily on fish from those big river basins. Now, think about the tools they use to actually process all this food. When archaeologists dig up unfamiliar objects, like old copper tools or heavy stone querns, they often use a really clever trick: present-day analogies. By comparing those ancient stones to grinding stones still used in rural areas today, experts can confidently say, yep, these were definitely used to grind grains for food preparation. But it gets trickier when we look at other surviving implements. I invite you to play detective with us for a second. Do you think these specific flat copper blades and stone tools were their primary gear for agricultural harvesting? It's a fantastic question that really forces us to look beyond just the object itself and try to imagine the actual human hands that held it thousands of years ago. Which brings us to section 4, cities of stolen brick and the tragic plight of Harappa. Next up on our log, we're examining their architecture, and honestly, this brings us to a really shocking historical tragedy. Back in 1875, Alexander Cunningham, he was the first Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, kind of known as the father of Indian archaeology, made a totally devastating realization. The ancient site of Harappa had been brutally pillaged by modern brick robbers. Seriously, they had stolen enough ancient, beautifully baked bricks from this ruined city to lay roughly 100 miles of railway line between Lahore and Multan. A massive, irreplaceable chunk of history was literally just paved over before anyone could even study it. But despite that tragic destruction at Harappa, surviving structures at other sites, especially up on the elevated citadel of Mohenjo-daro, reveal absolutely incredible urban planning. The masonry is astonishingly precise, particularly the Great Bath. Experts highly suspect that this unique, totally watertight structure wasn't just for your everyday washing up. It was most likely used for some kind of special, elite ritual cleansing. Let's move to Section 5, Tracking Social Differences Through Burials and Wealth. Seeing grand, complex structures like the Great Bath naturally makes you wonder, right? Did this highly planned society have extreme divides between the rich and the poor? To answer that, without having any written tax records or royal decrees to read, archaeologists have to look underground, at their burials. And when we compare the Harappans to their contemporaries over in Egypt, the contrast is kind of mind-blowing. The Egyptians were busy building massive, towering pyramids, royal tombs just absolutely stuffed to the brim with gold and enormous wealth. Harappan burials, on the other hand, way more understated. They just didn't tend to bury massive hoards of precious items with their dead. Instead, researchers have to study super subtle clues, like tiny variations in pottery or the presence of specific ornaments in a grave, to try and piece together their social ladder. And today, our modern detectives have an absolutely groundbreaking new tool in their kit: archaeogenetics. By very carefully extracting ancient DNA from the remains found in these burials, scientists can use molecular genetics to map out exactly who these populations were, how they moved around, and who they were related to. It's essentially giving us a biological blueprint of a lost society. Finally, we arrive at Section 6, Piecing Together the Past by Interpreting the Evidence. So how exactly do archaeologists read the raw earth to build this whole complex narrative about ancient cities, diets, and social structures? Well, because people continuously lived, built, threw their trash out, and rebuilt in the exact same spots over centuries, their history is quite literally stacked. Over millennia, all that constant use and reuse of the landscape causes the ground level to slowly rise, eventually building up into these large mounds. When a site is finally abandoned, wind and water just layer right over it. So by carefully slicing through these mounds, archaeologists can basically read the timeline of a civilization, working backwards from the top down. But unearthing those layers, it is incredibly demanding, downright brutal work. It was perfectly captured by R.E. Wheeler, a later Director General of the ASI, when he described his 1946 excavations at Harappa. He wrote about the sheer, grueling physical toll of toiling with picks and knives under a blazing sun, pushed at a relentless pace. It's a pretty stark reminder that every single ancient bead and brick we study today was painstakingly pulled from the earth by hand. There is, however, a really cruel reality to archaeological reconstruction. Ultimately, because the tropical climate of the Indian subcontinent quickly rots away organic materials, things like woven cloth, leather, carved wood, and reeds, they generally decompose completely. They're just gone. So our entire understanding of the Harappans is heavily restricted to only the most durable items that managed to survive the centuries: stone tools, burnt clay, terracotta, and metal objects. And that leaves us with a truly fascinating final thought to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. If we only know these people by their most durable trash and their discarded tools, how much of their vibrant, colorful culture, their brightly dyed clothes, their intricate wooden furniture, their leather goods, has simply vanished into the soil? And even more importantly, what incredible secrets of the Indus Valley are still buried out there right now, just waiting for the next generation of detectives to uncover?